Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of In Lay Terms. I am your host, Peyman Askari. I'm joined by my two friends. First, we have JP. Welcome back, JP.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Always. And also, Wolf, how are you doing?
I'm well. How are you, Peyman? And how are you, John, JP?
Very good.
I'm good also. It's Woof'relius, but we'll go with
Just
Wolf if
Wolf,
that's
yeah.
okay. Uh, I think a week or 2 weeks back, JP and I, we did a space, and JP and I were kind of sharing our worldviews. And then Wolf, you were in the audience. You came up, you asked some questions, made some points. You and I know each other. You and JP maybe not as well, but I wanted to give JP the opportunity to hear your unique worldview. It's not in contrast to me or JP. It's just worded a little bit differently, and you might have some stronger views on some things, and that's why I brokered this meeting. So, Wolf, if you could please go ahead and tell us, what do you think is the ultimate problem in Canada? This thing you call the crown.
Well, the ultimate problem is the crown in this sense. People mistake it for the king, or before Charles, his mother, the queen, the sitting monarch, and somehow they mistake that their particular family or their particular set of corporations or their particular familial network of power somehow owns Canada or is the ultimate authority in Canada, uh, when in fact they are stakeholders in a thing called the Crown, which I believe is a remnant of the British Empire, which after World War II and then, of course, the ensuing loss of the Suez Canal, had to accept kind of a second tier position to the United States. Um, but they infiltrated and they infiltrated large tranches of U.S. power networks, right? Other nations have as well, because ultimately what the crown is, I believe, and I'm not a historian, I'm just an average fellow. It's a power cartel. It's like a mafia or a special interest group. People use terms like cartel, mafia, secret society, special interest group, NGO. It's literally just a group of people, peers and near peers, with similar or convergent interests. It doesn't have to be a top-down, vertically integrated, command and control, Dr. Evil mastermind kind of situation. It's, you know, global governance level actors, agents, entities, nation states, corporations, intel groups, cartels, a hybrid mixture of all these interests, financial, um, um, sociological, or cybernetic, or otherwise, cooperating to prepare the game board, as it were, of the world, like you would in a game of Risk or so on, right? Factions arise, rivalries, um, cooperations, all of that stuff. But ultimately, the crown is a corporation or a corporate version of rebranding of a fragmented British Empire that, like a transformer, has broken apart into different pieces in Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom, New Zealand, and then of course other organizations that they have connections with, banking institutions, the BIS. It's human beings pursuing power and favor for their heirs. And when I say their heirs, and I'll finish with this, I don't just mean their blood and flesh. I mean the institutions and the etching into the world that the asset of their money and um, their interference in other people's agency leaves behind them. So that legacy propagates forward into the future, like a deer path in the woods, right? People tread down that area. You make where all the deer paths go, you control what people can access, right? If they're too afraid to go off that path. That's kind of what the crown is.
I don't know, JP, you want to take that, or should I?
I mean, I agree entirely with that. It just simply makes sense, and not just on its own accord. Like when you look around and you're trying to determine what's happening, it's like I often use different phrasing, like you had mentioned. It's clear we're in a stage of oligarchy. All of our systems are seemingly influenced by a clandestine oligarchy, and I understand how that sounds. Again, I always qualify it as being very sensational, but in my heart of hearts, I believe that. That's what my intuition and my logic tells me, just trying to put my own framing on everything that's occurring. I generally, most of my knowledge was relative to America, and some of the I hate to use the term, but it's the best way to describe it would be some of the conspiracy theories that I'm familiar with are more relative to America. So I mean, it's interesting hearing of this Crown Corporation. I've heard a lot of it before, and just like you kind of qualified that a lot of people get mistaken and assume it's the monarch or their familial ties. I definitely am guilty of that. I assumed it was relative to these powerful families that somehow have attained a level of power, obviously, and then they were able to hold on to influence. So I didn't realize that it is more of like a stakeholder thing, as you said, which is very interesting.
There certainly are some families. I'm not a great fan of Lyndon LaRouche as a human being, if you know that name, and others do. And I have not read a lot of his EIR reports, executive intelligence reports, something in the 80s. LaRouche talked about Venetian bankers and legacy bloodlines in the United Kingdom and different aspects of kind of old school conspiracy talk before people realized that conspiracies are actually rather mundane. They have this magical kind of sparkly aura around them, like you have to be that inappropriate uncle in order to even think any of it's true. And in fact, all you ever have to do is have earned gray hairs, right? Earned a few gray hairs, like really earn them, and realize that when you cooperate with people who you don't completely trust, right? They use vectors of um, I guess, relaxed due diligence on our part, right? Just trust me, bro. Or the government would never do that. Or if that was true, it would be on the news. Perception management and narrative control. That's the operational cover that all of these groups use. Now, LaRouche talked about a lot of stuff that is kind of pretty far into the right, but he was right about a large number of things. If you know who Matthew Arrett is,
I do.
he has done a lot of research and scholarship, genuine scholarship on the matter. He can talk a lot more cogently about LaRouche, but some of what Arrett shares from LaRouche has been vetted through Arrett and his wife's and their peers' uh, process, right? Their process to vet and fact check. I trust a fair bit of what Arrett shares, and when Arrett describes the family style structures of these groups, some of them are bloodlines. Some of the Venetian banking families. You hear talk about the black nobility, black not being the color of your skin or your ethnic background, but in terms of a black pope, a gray pope, a white pope. There's a whole constellation of chaff, if you know a fighter plane shooting off the sparkly bits to take missiles away. There's a lot of chaff around this. The weirder aspects of what we call conspiracy theories are that kind of deflection process. But ultimately, a conspiracy theory is a realist's theory of power because we don't ignore or obviate the fact that human beings cooperate for their own interests. And all we have to do is look at the world and look at the ordering of wealth and power to realize that the purpose of every system in the world that operates at the global governance and national level, the purpose of every system is what those systems do. Now, let me ask you this rather than me explaining what I think they do. What do you guys think the purposes of the world's governance systems are? What do they actually do? Not what they claim to do. What do they actually do? What's their purpose?
I think they perpetuate the whole process. It's like I say, money for these people is seemingly just a tool of control.
Bingo.
So I mean, from a functional aspect, it's just to keep the human farm running.
Yeah, I put out a video of Tom Luongo today. He basically said it's feudalism. They lend money into existence, and they take their what do you call it? The lender takes the big the wig,
vigorish, the
the vig,
interest,
they
the
take the vig
arbitrage.
off of it. Yeah, and
It's a mob term.
we're just they're living off of our backs. It's slavery, in my opinion. But just a big thank you to Lori and Wandering Dragon for reposting the stream. If others can repost it, it would help. Thank you. Follow-up comments, Wolf?
Oh, no. You're right. I've been following Tom Longo's work for a couple of years, especially when he chats with Dave Collum and J.H. Kunstler. They often do a podcast on Tommy Kerrigan's show, Tommy's podcast. The back episodes are well worth watching if you're interested in global governance issues and grounded, conspiracy talk. And when I say conspiracy, I don't mean any element of pejorative to it, right? Nation states conspire with one another. That's why we have intelligence services. We have a public-facing coordination and policy settling or crafting domain, right? The United Nations, the WEF, but of course, all the genuine conspiratorial, the darker kind of wet work, whether it's financial or actual, mayhem and slaughter to incentivize people to cooperate. All of that can be learned from any mafia movie. If you want to understand, I believe, how many of these cartels function, simply watch the first Godfather movie. And don't watch it with specifics to an Italian mafia in New York in the setting. Look at the dynamics of power between people in the official channels of government and then those people who operate outside those channels but still access and wield power. That's actually how the world works.
Well, I just want to, you got to understand, a lot of the audience, they don't even know what the crown is. So,
Right.
So in explaining it to them, how is it that Canada has a crown, the United States doesn't have a crown, but both of the same countries are sort of in the same situation? Like, does America have a counterpart to the crown?
This might sound odd, but the leaders of the American Revolution, in my opinion now, it was different a few years ago, weren't so much rebelling against the British Crown at that time, which was a much more nation state identified power, right? The 18th century, right? 1776 is when the Americans had the revolution. They, rather than a hostile takeover, think of that as a hostile, not takeover, a bifurcation, a splitting. The mafia boss, the crown, in that case, the British crown, their underboss, think of them as the US, they realized we're separated by an ocean. We've got this entire country open, right? We've got an empty set of British loyalists to the north. We've got the fading Spanish Empire to the south. We have the entire continent from Pacific to Atlantic, right? Many of them were also Freemasons, and this is an element as well. Many of them believed in the idea of a new Atlantis, right? This ties in with Freemasonic pursuit of something called the Great Work, which is establishing or reestablishing an Eden-like utopia on Earth, where you have a class of philosopher kings who govern everyone else. And in separating from the British Crown, they actually set up their own version of what the Crown is, their own version of a power cartel. Now, they did it with a few more checks and balances so that power could be distributed more evenly among the judiciary, the executive, and the legislative branches. But that can be improved upon. We know that. We know there are weaknesses in that system. But the British, having lost North America, right, to the Americans, who would accept that loss? Who would accept that loss of resources, right? No one who once possessed it would accept that loss. So the British took it back, and they tried and tried and tried with measures around banking, right? Usurping money control in the United States. Eventually, they succeeded in 1913 with the creation of the Federal Reserve. But that period of time, right around the early 1900s, right, 1914, the First World War, to about the post-World War II era, you had the British Empire formally breaking apart, and then taking its velvet mantle and crown off, putting it away, and corporatizing and blending its 2.5 centuries of power politics and intelligence wet work strategies, blending that with the nascent United States, with powers within the United States, banking families, corporate interests, deeper intelligence interests, to then kind of set a mycelial network of influence through America. So they didn't lose America for very long. They had to kind of force a new partnership with them. And the crown itself, think of it more as a cartel. So does America have its own cartel? Yeah, it does. We don't call it a crown, though. right? The British power cartel is the crown. The American power cartel is the American empire. It's a corporatocracy. And I'll hush now, but Tom Luongo and others are pointing to a fascistic, neo-feudal technocracy. That's what they're pointing at. You can see that architecture being laid out.
So it's very in line with like how Whitney Webb is describing it for
I believe
America.
she's accurate about a lot of things. Yes, she's
Her
far better
research is, yeah, it's very thorough, her research, and she provides receipts for everything.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say the crown and then tying it with banking, and the questions I ask, Wolf, they're out of my ignorance. You're clearly far more knowledgeable on the details of this than I am. It's just genuine curiosity. When you say the banking interests would be the British crown, is that like you're kind of indicating that there was some kind of they co-opted the Rothschild banking system, or they were in on it, or there's some kind of shared thing there?
I think rather than being co-religionists, they are co-predators, right? They are apex predators in an economic system and a system of agency that we all exist in. So they cooperate with one another. When one of them gets a little too greedy, the other ones check them, right? There's enough for everyone, except everyone's really hungry, right? And they really would rather their number one or two rival have a little less access. They'd rather have a little more touch upon levers of power. And if you have looked into anything like corporate ownership, right, you might think, this guy owns 3.1% of this large mega corporation. That's such a small number. It's actually not a small number. 3.1% of a multi-billion-dollar company is not small. When you have 3%, and this guy's got 2%, and 5 other people have 1% each, and 1,000 other people have a fraction of 1%, slowly you build coalitions of power. And if you touch the right lever or you make the right deal, you can leverage that power into effecting the world. We've been led astray, I believe, in with Hollywood movies, thinking that there's a hyper concentration of power at an apex, right? A single seat or even 2 or 3 seats. I think is a lot more dynamic than anyone realizes.
I think again, I think that just sounds right. 100%. I think you're accurate on that.
Wolf, I think JP, the question he was asking, at least as I understood it, what exactly happened in 1913 that gave power
Federal
to
Reserve.
the British?
Federal Reserve Act was
Yes.
passed. And they
Right,
they did it close to Christmas when Congress was mostly at home, and it was done when Woodrow Wilson was compromised, apparently cognitively, from the myths I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure he was cognitively impaired his entire presidential term.
It's a good argument that could be made for that.
No, sorry, my question is like the creation of the Federal Reserve, how does that transfer authority to England?
It's not so much a matter of transferring authority. It's who now gets to count what counts, who gets to create the main incentive the rest of the world operates on. Not all of the world, but a large part of the world, and that is money. So the Federal Reserve System, my understanding, is that it severed the connection between a tangible backing to the US dollar, gold, and they severed it. Wait, that's not true. I'm confusing 1971. Forgive me. The creation of the Federal Reserve was when the United States government surrendered its power to issue and control its own currency to a set of uh, stakeholder interests, a collection of banks within what was called the Federal Reserve System of banking. So rather than issuing their own money as they had in the past, the US, they now borrow money at interest from this private banking group, the Federal Reserve. It's not a federal agency, and it certainly doesn't have reserves of currency on hand for fractional reserve banking. So prior to the creation of the Federal Reserve, the US had gone through a few different money shocks where there were credit bubbles, debt bubbles, and there was lack of currency in some areas. And these, of course, affected the stability of people's ability to do trade, to reliably count on the value of money in order to settle things with a high level of trust. In previous decades and centuries, since the creation of the American government, they had sound money. And I believe it was Hamilton and Jefferson who fought with each other, who contested about the nature of banking powers in the US. They wanted a severance from the British imperial style of banking, whereby credit could be issued to you, and you would then be beholden to the issuer of that credit, so that you could be incentivized through debt. And thus, we see the war engine of debt cycles for borrowing credit. And pretty soon, if you are in enough debt to a bank and you don't have any resources yourself, the easiest way to pay your creditor off is to go take someone else's plunder. So you have an incentive to create more war. So the US Federal Reserve System essentially was an internal coup that put quietly to sleep the American ability to mint, or not mint, to create currency, to create its own money. It's still, as far as I understand, the US Treasury still retains the ability to mint coins. They can actually strike coins still. But the creation of currency, paper money, is something outsourced to the Federal Reserve, which means it's a government pork barrel program to basically have your monetary supply and large parts of your monetary and physical policy set by a private banking interest group. Now, that got even worse in 70, 71 when they went off the gold standard. Now, the illusion of any soundness to the money was completely gone. Now, let me bookend it with this one simple thing. Anyone in the audience who wants to learn more about how a state creates its own money without relying on interest, right? Borrowing that money from someone else who just creates it out of thin air. Look into something called the Guernsey Money Experiment. Guernsey, the island of Guernsey in the British Channel. I believe in the 60s, forewent borrowing interest, money at interest for public works expenses, massive public works expenses. And instead, they created and issued their own money, Guernsey dollars, I'll call them. I'll send a link up in a minute. And they incentivized people in the Channel Islands, at least on Guernsey, to begin using these Guernsey dollars by telling them, you can pay your property taxes in this. Anything you have to pay and render to a fine to the Guernsey government, you can use our kind of script for it, our money for it. So they were able then to inject money, right, and incentives into their local economy. And people then would buy, trade, and settle in Guernsey dollars rather than fiat money borrowed at interest from private banking. Never happened again after the Guernsey money experiment. You won't hear any people talking about it. Right? It was a return to sound money, not borrowed at interest from private lenders. It was sovereign money issuance. That's what you need to look into.
So I have a couple of questions. Relative to some of the wars of my lifetime, some of the wars in the Middle East, I hear a lot of people, I guess you'd have to call them theorists, that say one of the main reasons, like Gaddafi, for instance, or Saddam Hussein was targeted was because he didn't have this Federal Reserve banking system. They were looking to go beyond that and have their own banking system. Is that accurate?
I think it has elements of truth to it. Most transactions in the world are presently settled in US dollars.
Yes.
My understanding is that Gaddafi wanted to either transact in gold or a currency that wasn't based on the US dollar. And of course, if people start settling their transactions in things other than your prime reserve currency, well, that's a brook to your authority. That's a challenge, right? That's someone touching your rice bowl, as it were. So they had to take him out. He was
And
an actual threat.
now, would this be similar? And again, there's a lot of people reinterpreting the World War II narratives, which is totally taboo to do, but I can't help but be intrigued by some of these questionings of the official narrative. But I hear a lot of people kind of insinuating or implying now that, like, Hitler, by kicking the Rothschild bank out and having the Reich Bank, was also doing a similar thing, and then having such success economically relative to the Weimar Republic. I mean, a lot of people were saying that the banking interests were concerned that everyone was going to see, okay, there is a way to have prosperity without kind of falling in line with the banking oligarchy.
I don't know enough about World War II history and Hitler and the Nazi regime to comment intelligently on that, except I share your intuition. However, one thing I do know is that American banking interests lent huge sums of money to the Nazi regime.
Yes.
At the corporate and state level. The Autobahn network was created with that loaned money. So the idea that Hitler was somehow um, revolutionizing the money system of Germany, I don't entirely buy it because I don't entirely understand it. I think he was
Right.
just changing one partner for another.
Okay. Were you also aware? Now I've heard this recently. I believe I was watching Tucker Carlson. I can't remember the guest he had on, but they were indicating that during World War One, the head of the Bank of America and the head of the Bank of Germany were brothers. Were you aware of this?
Is that the Warburg banking family?
I believe so. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. The presidential Bush family is involved in this as well.
Hmm.
Um, there is a lot of fraternization across the Atlantic, wherever you have ties of large money interests, right? And I don't mean a particular ethnic group with that. I don't want anyone in the audience listening to think I'm pointing out to any one ethnic group.
And I think the ethnic, when you get to the ethnicity aspect of it, I think it's reductive, and I think it actually hurts the arguments, because I don't think this has anything to do with religion. I don't think this has anything to do with ethnicity. I think it has to do with power and the
Yes,
very small group at top that control it. I think everything else is a distraction.
that small group also, they only get to sit there for as long as they can keep other people from clawing their way into their spot,
That's
right?
right. That's just the nature. That's just the
That's
absolute
right.
nature of things.
Uh, if you know Star Wars at all, right? The Sith, right? The evil Jedi guys, right? The bad guys. They often, and it's a broken mythology, but they talk about there always being just two Sith, right?
Mhm.
A master and an apprentice. One to hold power and the other to crave it. And the one is the tool of the other, right? The one who holds power knows that eventually he will fall to power. And if he's truly a powerful wielder, right? If he's going to imprint his legacy into the future, he has to choose an apprentice, right? He has to choose an heir who will continue to enact the master's will into the future without knowing it, while thinking it's their own will being enacted. Because then, even though you've died, your will dominates through death, through your apprentice, as it were. Now, change this cartoon idea of Star Wars and a Sith master and an apprentice. Instead, think about a George Soros style dynasty where you can bequeath billions of dollars in the form of NGOs and institutions and think tanks, the Cecil Rhodes, bit. You enact your will through the next decade or century of power, right? It's winning from beyond the grave.
And
That's also
that's
been
kind
Indian.
of that's kind of what you were referencing at first. It's like the legacy of these institutions, the legacy of these individuals' influence that they've had, that they're kind of keeping together.
Yes, and of course, any worthy heir is going to realize this is an element of things and try and spin things to their own favor. The dynamics are involved with game theory.
Now, are you familiar with a concept called Chesterton's fence?
No, remind me, please.
Chesterton's fence is it's kind of a philosophical concept. If you encounter a fence and you're not entirely sure what it's for, you probably shouldn't get rid of the fence,
Ah,
because
yes.
there could be a hazard. You know what I mean? It's just a colloquialism. But I often think of this with fiat currency and our central banking system. What goes if that's gone? Like, as flawed as it is, like, what's going to replace it, and how are we going to be sure that it's going to function as good as this does presently, as well as you could say it's functioning?
That's a big question. I don't know. I just would prefer that soundness be returned to our money system because at present,
Stability.
yeah, not just
Mhm.
stability though. s- Soundness, I'm sorry, stability should be downstream of soundness. When I say sound money, I mean money that is not just wheeled into existence out of air.
It's
I mean
backed by
money that's
something
backed. Yes,
tangible. Yes.
yes, absolutely. At present, we don't truly have that. um, and even money, if you think carefully about money, it's actually just a transaction layer um, over top something else that's truly being exchanged. And Peyman, you mentioned this. People are selling or trading their time. Right? That's the one thing you never get more of: your time, your life, your energy, your attention, your will, your effort. little bits and pieces of your soul, what you spend. Oh, I got to do this again. You're selling that, right? For currency. It's not even money. You're selling it for currency.
For credit, essentially.
Yeah.
It's like a company store. That's why I say it's like when I'm observing Canada and just the kind of modern ethos, the way our countries are going towards more of a corporate model, it's like we're not these citizens, we're more like indentured employees. And that fits that neo-feudalist framing, right? And it's not that employees can't have some qualities of life, but I mean we're still on some very real level, like we're kept servants in some regard. And that's the way it's seemingly going.
Yes, and that isn't, of course, without our touch on it. We're also responsible at the population level. I don't refer to individuals here, but at the population level, we're largely responsible for that because most people really don't want to think about these things. And if most people are provided with a workable illusion that allows them uh, to live what they believe is a happy life, they're quite happy to surrender their agency for security and comfort.
Yes, this is seen time and time again in history. Provide it with the right fear stimuli too. We're just kind of predisposed to these behavior patterns, and that's why we see them recurring through history.
And yes, fear is a large component of it. That's to keep the questioning people in line. But the vast bulk of people, they're not even so much afraid as they are ignorant. And I mean that in a pure and a neutral and uninflected sense. They don't know what they don't know. 5 years ago, I couldn't have told you the difference between money and currency. 5 years ago, I don't think I could have told you what the Federal Reserve was or
Mhm.
explained what the crown was. I have a better understanding of those things now. And even now, my understanding is still uh, nascent. It's beginner level.
It's like me and Peyman get on this topic frequently. I attribute practically all of the problems in society to the lack of education. And not only are we not learning basic concepts like economics and how power works, basic introductions to philosophy from like an epistemological sense, but we're not only with the absence of that, we're then inundated with fallacious conceptual framings. And I really think that's kind of the whole premise. It's a Prussian military model in which we teach our children. And then when you get into academia, it's been so influenced by critical theory and critical pedagogies that we're inundating people we're conditioning them with certain conceptual frameworks. Like Yuri Bezmenov famously refers to it as ideological subversion.
Mm-hmm. You're right about that. And an element in all of this is the creation of fictional persons, legal persons that are not human beings, that do not have sentience. They can't have feelings. They don't experience things. A corporation is one such legal fiction. The crown is an example of one of those legal fictions, right? The crown is a corporation soul. It is a non-human person. It can't pay consequences to you, right? It's a sovereign. There's no one above it. It only has peers and underlings, right? When I say sovereign, I mean someone who has the ability to wage war, mint money, extract resources, and use lethal force, right? Within whatever passes for legitimacy. There aren't many sovereigns on the planet, and the crown is one of them. And here in Canada, we often don't realize, because we're not taught this, that Canada itself is actually a corporate entity. Canada is a facade, it's a mask on top of this corporate thing, this legal fiction of personhood called Canada, which exists generation to generation, no matter who inhabits the office, right? Like a corporation with a board of directors.
Is this
Keeping
relative
control.
to maritime law? Sorry for interjecting, but I watched a documentary that everyone shares on X, and it's The Illusion of Canada. Have you seen this?
I've seen it. I have not fact checked it in
Th
detail.
That's like me too. I was just wondering if that's what you were referencing, but it's not.
Um, there are elements of truth in that. Just a quick aside: the whole idea of maritime law and all capital letters, and you're a stock certificate and free men on the land and so on. That is a little bit of a trap, right? There may be truth nuggets in there, but you're not going to be able to, at least in Canada or the United States, you're not going to be able to use the legal system they inhabit and that they run to challenge them on little things like this. If there was a legal solution to these things, it would have been met a very long time ago. Now, are there elements of truth to that? Almost certainly, but a historian and an economist would have to unpack that. All of the people trying to spread that information about, maritime law and capital letters and being owned, there's truthiness to it, right? We are economic production units. We're stable taxation reservoirs. But the idea that you can submit paperwork and sever yourself from the state and have different standing in court, I need receipts. I mean, I need receipts with the ink on it still wet for me to believe that. And right now I don't have access to that. But
Makes sense.
Canada and the corporate structure that it is, if you can inhabit a seat at the board, you can then exert control or influence in the corporation of Canada, right? The
Well,
nation state of Canada.
I'm going to hit you with a series of questions. Answer them any way you like. This concept of the crown, so the crown in Canada, how is that related to the monarch? Now is the king, before it was the queen. How is it related to the city of London? How is it related to Vatican City? Is Vatican City just a dying power center, or is it actually still have gold? Is that how they're influencing things? Good
I
luck.
can only speculate. Is my mic on? Yes. Okay. I don't know a lot about the Vatican. People will talk about Washington, the city of London, and I don't mean the capital city of Britain, but I mean the city of London corporation. And then the Vatican as being a tripartite kind of distributed power node, right? Where they each have a piece of the puzzle, like in the American model, the judiciary, the executive, and the legislative. So think of those three power centers as, a three-armed juggler keeping everything in the flow, but each arm has a mind of its own. That might be the case. But the monarch, just like Burger King, right? Or Ronald McDonald, the monarch in this era is a mascot, is a symbol, is a public facing image of what the crown is. And that's part of the deflection because people then easily confuse the pageantry of British royal family activities, the heraldry, the symbology behind it, and then the history of Britain with its wars between barons and the king. They mistake all of that for, the king is the crown is the king. He's a brand manager. He's a stakeholder, and he and his family were much more powerful shareholders in that venture centuries ago. But they've had to sell equity in their corporation or had it stolen from them, the Dutch East India Company and the early corporations of the British Empire, over time. The city of London is related to this in this sense. In the Vatican, I'm sorry, in Italy, you have the Vatican, which is a city state within Rome. In London, England, you have the City of London Corporation, which is, again, a kind of a city state there, except it's about 1,000 years old. And the Larouchians would tell you that it's related to Venetian banking dynasty money, which itself is related to previous Byzantine or late Roman Empire money interests or power interests. In this sense, if you can imagine, like the genes for red-hairedness, right? A red-haired father, a red-haired mother, they have red-haired children. But as those children go out into the world and mate with others, the incidence of red hair might drop off, but it's still there, right? So these particular power groups, oh, I lost my point. Why was I bringing up red hair? I wanted to make a point about genetic continuation. The City of London Corporation is about 1,000 years old. If there's any continuity of vision, of power, of strategy and tactics over 1,000 years, it would be impressive. If it was a high fidelity transmission of legacy and will. That there's some transmission shouldn't surprise anyone, but the fidelity of that transmission, the accuracy of the replication of will and effort, that's where things take a little different branch, right? Every plan has to face contact with the enemy, and in this case, 1,000-year empire. I don't think it holds, not with fidelity, right? Not with fidelity. And people might say, well, you could look at the Egyptian empire and that their dynasties lasted thousands of years. That's what we're told. That's what we've recovered from the sand. But do we know that for sure? No.
I don't even think we know about things for sure that happened 100 years ago, let alone thousands of years ago. I think the more time you add, the more likely it's convoluted and just narratives. So I have a question, Wolf. Now, when I look at everything, and again, most of my knowledge is from a pure conjecture aspect. I've read a lot. I know bits and pieces about history. I'm no expert by any stretch. But when I look at everything that's occurring geopolitically, I can't help but see a factionalization or a fragmentation amongst these ruling classes. And like we mentioned kind of like a fascistic, neo-feudalist technocracy. And then there's like on the other side, I'm hearing the other vision would be like a neo-Malthusian carbon credit type of communist style of a government. Like it's like, is that the two options that are vying right now?
I think those are just two different flavors of the same
Of the same.
same thing, authoritarianism, right? As opposed to liberty. So the communists and the fascists or the Nazis, those two poles, those Bugs Bunny-esque poles we have, they've got a high degree of overlap, let's say.
I agree with you there, but I mean, is there just is in your impression, because it's seemingly like first off, the proposition is the ruling class warring right now, or are we watching a spectacle? Like, is there actual conflict within that realm in your impression?
There has to be actual conflict because humans contest with each other and conflict with each other. There's also subterfuge. There's false alliances. There is betrayal. So yes, I think in the North American, from the North American point of view, and Peyman, your guest in previous shows, Tom Longo mentions this. There is like a real fight now. Like people have been cut. There's like it's on between the British or European banking establishments and the American banking establishments. The Americans would like to maintain reserve currency status for as long as they can, because even a micro fraction of a percentage point could be hundreds of millions to billions of dollars, not only in present revenue, but future revenue as money velocity bounces around your entire settlement system. So every little fraction counts.
Now, isn't the only reason it's in trouble as being being replaced as a reserve currency because they were weaponizing it against other parts of the world?
I think that's a major element, right? It was Charles de Gaulle who sent 2 battleships over to the U.S. to take back their gold.
I remember hearing that story. Yeah, pulled into New York Harbor.
For decades now, people who've had to rely on the U.S. dollar realize that it's getting less and less valuable. It's being watered down, right? It looks like whiskey, but it tastes like water, right? What the hell is going on? We don't want to settle in that anymore. Well, you have to. Well, why do we have to? Out comes the gun, metaphorically speaking. You have to.
Well, in the case of Iraq, it wasn't just a metaphor.
Yeah, that's right. But yeah, I mean, it is a mafia-like system, and a mafia is just a cartel, right?
And
Canada itself.
Of course it works like that. That just makes sense. It's just like when we were speaking earlier about conspiracy, like the whole term conspiracy theorist as a pejorative, it exists relative to some of the questions about the Kennedy assassination. Skepticism, that was when it kind of reached into the public lexicon and you were hearing people utilize it themselves. If you're calling someone a conspiracy theorist as a pejorative, it's essentially kind of high ignorance, in my opinion.
It is, and sadly, when they say conspiracy theorist, they're using a poorly chosen set of words to actually communicate something else entirely. They mean crackpot theorist, right?
Yes.
None of this is crackpottery if you look at history. None of it. Now, some of the small details might be wrong. Some of them might be outdated. But as a whole, human beings cooperate with one another for the aims of empire, of power, of influence, of control, of desire. Now, if you already have more money than you know what to do with, if you already sampled every delight known to the flesh, you have only then left to you delights of the mind. And when you are not intellectual or musical or artistic, right, your new delights of mind then come with exercising power, because you realize very quickly, I don't know, I'm not a multimillionaire or billionaire, but when you are a multimillionaire or billionaire, Money doesn't mean anything to you anymore. The presence of your will upon the world is what matters now. So you count your wealth in influence, in power, in effect, and incentivizations. And money is the great incentivizer for everyone else who doesn't have enough of it.
And
That's
from a game theoretical perspective, as I've heard you mention that now twice, it's almost practically guaranteed that there's a clandestine oligarchy.
yes,
That's right.
yes.
Yeah. So I mean, it's like, why wouldn't there be? In other words, in more simplistic terminology, like this, of course there is.
Yeah. And it need not even be cheating per se, right? If counting cards at the table is cheating, you're just using your natural abilities. Well, what else are we going to call cheating, right? Open cheating, right? Bringing out the 45 saying, you have to settle in our currency or else. That's outright cheating, right? But there's other levels of cheating: narrative framing, perception management, cultivating incentive, blackmail, anything you can imagine. Here's where it gets complicated. You, Peyman, myself, most of the human beings we know, as far as we can tell, have what I'll call baseline empathy, right? They have the same general idea of pain and suffering, joy and happiness, sorrow and loss, and an empathic connection with others. You can imagine yourself being in someone else's shoes. You can engage in role reversal, not just as an intellectual exercise, but in the sense of feeling, right? In experiencing and living. What happens if you are one of those human beings that's either been traumatized into sociopathy, or even worse, traumatized into full psychopathy, or made into or born as a natural psychopath? Right? What happens to you then? Where do you go then? How do you engage in game theory contests with a world of people that have, full color vision, as it were, in the realm of empathy, but you have only black and white, me and not me, good for me and not good for me? How do those people succeed in a game theory environment? They don't understand the other players. So what do? Any idea?
Force. I would
Okay.
assume exertion of force.
And if you're openly brutal or an open cheater like that, all the other players are pretty much going to gang up or freeze you out of the game. So force doesn't work for very long. What works after that?
Reciprocity, making a deal.
Making a deal. But how do you make a deal with someone? How do you garner trust with them if you're a sociopath or a psychopath? Or even worse, you don't care about their deal making, right? You've got to use subterfuge, you've got to cheat, or you parasitize them like a fungus in the brain of an ant, right? You basically infiltrate their systems. You fill their culture full of ideas and tension points, kind of like two magnets, right? That you crudely use to move a steel ball down a table, right? You get into a groove where you've got a high degree of control until something in the field warps slightly out of sync, and you have to reestablish a new equilibrium. Sometimes you lose control of the ball, other times you don't. Parasitization is the ideal cheating tactic in game theory, right? Everyone's happy if you're a successfully camouflaged parasite. No one realizes you're counting cards and dealing from the bottom, because like it's okay. I'll close. Let me finish with this. If you know how to play chess, your mind was probably blown when you heard about the castling move. Like, what? You can do that? What? What? These people know how to castle, and no one else does, and they guard the secret.
That's a very perfect, succinct analogy, and that's what they're desperate from getting out, essentially, and that's why they're so desperate to hold on to power. Now, my question, just relative to the whole conversation, and I'll take it back to what's occurring now with some of the war in the world. Is this what we're seeing? Has these negotiations, have these arrangements that have been working for the last 150 years, are they now coming to an end, and we're seeing a factionalization with different interests and different kind of different plans for humanity, and they're coming up against one another and they're fighting?
That's my sense. If you were to assert that, we could probably all offer a few anecdotal bits of evidence to support that. I think that's true.
That's the best framing I can come up with.
I don't think there's as much genuine bad blood as people believe, but I also don't believe that the cooperative nature of public face we see from these people is anywhere as genuine, right? A lot of it is kayfabe. Think of professional wrestling
Right.
from back in
I
the day.
use that term a lot. I first heard it from Eric Weinstein.
Right.
And it was just brilliant. And like I say, when I watch the parliament come back there and I'm watching some of the interactions, it's just such a performative, elaborate charade.
Yes.
And the whole premise of this charade is to provide the illusion of participatory governance to the slaves, to the debt-ridden wage slaves. And that's the dynamic of the relationship between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, so to speak.
I don't know this for a fact, but it was related to me the other day that the word proletariat descends from a word that means breeding, the breeding stock, the breeders from Roman time, the livestock
that as well.
class, right? Can you imagine?
It's just the way they see us, right? And it makes sense. And at that level, it's almost like it's a necessity. Like of course these people would arise, of course they would attain power, and of course they would cheat to hold on to it. So what we're seeing now is not sensational, it's kind of logical.
Sure, but all through human history, at least through Western history, we have stories and accounts to point at people declaring themselves the chosen of God. Right? Whether it's in ancient times in the Levant, where God's chosen people, or kings and nobles in Europe, right? God chose us, we were ordained by the priest class. This is just a naked assertion and acknowledgement that there are differences among people. We aren't all born equally enabled, but we all are born, I believe, with an equal moral value in our humanity, right? Doesn't matter if you are tall or thin or are smart or handy or coordinated or strong, whatever your gift set is, your fundamental humanity is the only ticket you need to ride on moral standing. Not everyone shares that view, though. And those who believe they're the elect of God, however they frame that and however they understand God to be, even if it's just raw nature, right, red in tooth and claw, they don't acknowledge that. They do actually believe we're not the same. How often have you seen that online, especially from young men, right-wing leaning men saying, you only criticize them for this. I say hang them all or start a war. We're not the same. It's an instinct deep in us.
Well, it's like it's an out-group bias, and it is relative to tribalism. And I think it's an evolutionarily instilled capacity we have. And if we're going to have any success as humanity moving forward, we have to be hyper aware of our propensity for doing this. Just with the Charlie Kirk assassination, we've seen the best example of that. And for me, as a Christian, I try to view things through a Christian purview. It's like you're just watching everyone kind of spewing the evil. It's kind of disconcerting, and I attribute it to this outgroup bias. Like once your humanity is obscured by that proclivity for outgroup bias, then you're totally tribalistic, and you're capable of committing atrocities, in my estimation.
Yes. You can commit those atrocities if you have the approval of your in-group to exercise atrocity against the out-group, because if you win, you will be absolved. You will receive absolution from your tribal leaders, your tribal elders.
Right? Socially, yeah, that's absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Guys, in winding down the interview episode, Wolf, can you tell us, like, what do you think what should Canada's next move be? Like, does Canada have a move? I'm talking about the Republic. Where do you think we should go from here?
Where we should, I would love to see a republic take hold in Canada, based in and around Alberta. I don't believe what most people in Canada call Canada is authentic. I believe it's a facade. I mentioned that before. Now, I don't mean to disdain or take away from anyone who has generations of family in this country. People will say that my ancestors built this country. We carved it from the land. That's true, right? They did a lot of work to carve this country out of the land. But do they own any of it? Were they performing work for hire and told and sold a mythology of being settlers and pioneers and crafters of a nation while they were just hired hands. Yeah. So Canada, I don't believe, is what we think it is. And it's a horrifying realization to wake up one day and realize, my God, I live almost like livestock on a farm. Am I chattel? Oh my God, I'm chattel. I'm going to go back to sleep because this feels bad. That's most of us, and I was asleep for a long time. I think I would say to anyone, if you want what exists today as Canada, which is pretty much the same as what existed as Canada 100 years ago, just in different clothing, um, I can't support that. I can't support an illusion. The only hope for Canada, and by Canada I mean Canadians who want liberty, is to withdraw from this system, and that's that is a formidable challenge because it requires investing pretty much everything you have for a payoff you'll never see.
It's like men who will plant seeds for trees that they'll never get to enjoy the shade of.
That's right. It's a Greek proverb.
Mm.
Yeah. For me, the only hope for Canada to escape the touch of the crown, I call the crown a filthy molester uncle, is to leave the house, is to get away. Right? An abusive husband or abusive partner isn't going to change because you plead with them. They're not going to change. You're going to be able to take them to court to say stop when they own the courts. The courts are sworn to them, like in Canada, right? The justices, the crown prosecutors, they're all sworn to serve the state. Here's the thing. We say the crown, right? Think of the crown as, this word is actually camouflage. The state with a capital S. The state. The same way North Korea is the state, right? Every prosecutor, every justice in Canada swears an oath of allegiance to the state, not to you or, pardon me, not to you or me. I almost burped there. Not to you or me, to the state. Do I want that to continue for Canada? Absolutely not. How about you, Peyman, and you, John? JP.
I agree entirely. I 100%. I couldn't have said it as eloquently myself.
Yeah, I mean, I just want people to be free. I want to be free on my land. Unless I commit a crime, and then they can come trespass on my land. But other than that, this is the farthest from what I want. Try to withdraw money from the bank. It's not your money. Try to hire somebody without the government's approval. Good luck. Try to fire somebody with their approval. Try to get into your car without a registration, a license, and a license plate.
We're really like obediently marching into totalitarianism, and it's such a slow acclimating process that so many are just unaware of it. Or the analogy you made earlier, Wolf, like you're vaguely aware of it, but you're just going to go back to sleep because it's too scary to acknowledge. It's that paradigm shifting realization that everything I know is not true, and I'm being exploited, and my future, my offspring is going to be exploited in perpetuity as long as this system is here.
This is a good way to describe what Wolf is talking about from One More Godless Woman. The crowned, foreign, inbred, pedophile, human trafficking, inland pirate family.
Oh God!
Sounds like
bumper sticker. Sounds like a what?
It's a band.
Reminds me of supercalifragilistic. Try saying that 5 times fast, right?
Well, I guess we can end it there. Why don't we go, Wolf, if you want to just, if you want to give final words, and then JP, if you want to talk about your podcast, and we'll end it.
Thanks for chatting, gentlemen. No final words. Just read. Everyone read more. Unplug and read.
That's good advice. 100%. I profusely enjoyed this conversation. I don't know how entertaining it was for everyone watching. I hope they derived some value out of it. But I very much enjoyed it. You're very intelligent and very nice and eloquent man, Wolf. I hope to speak with you again in the future.
Thank you very much. And Peyman, thank you for hosting us. And actually, an idea for you, Peyman. Again, I don't know how much time you have to spare throughout your days, but you may want to have like an after after action Twitter thread from guests like JP and myself and you, where we share little bits and factoids of information relevant to this particular topic, so people can leapfrog off of that and go and actually look up some of the sources and other things that we reference or that we can point them to. They won't be able to access it all through hearing us talk. So if that's something you want to do, let me know, and I'll share some slides.
Sure. Let's just use the as a jumping off point, the thread, whatever is created with this post in X.
Excellent.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for coming in, and to the audience, thank you for watching. Take care, everyone.
Cheers.